let me do a few checks here beforehand to make sure that we are. And we'll get right into the show because I am running a little bit late this week. So I might want to wait and let a few people join in first. So let's make sure I'm actually broadcasting before I start. Because this week, for some reason, nothing is cooperating. I have changed the camera angle though, so you can see a little bit more of me. I can't even get Facebook to load to see if I'm actually live. So if anybody is watching me on Facebook, can you say hi John or leave a comment or something? Okay, there we go. I see we have 8 viewers right now on Facebook. Let me check and make sure that we're live over on YouTube also. Yes, we're live on YouTube. And I see a bunch of hi Johns. So, hello everybody. Let's go ahead and get started with this week's episode of Bob's Live. It's definitely going to be an interesting one because trying to figure out how to do this week's episode and planning it has been a challenge. Again, that's why I'm a little bit late this week. So, let's go ahead and we'll get started. So, welcome to this week's episode of Bob's Live, our weekly show right here on the internet. And as always, we're available both on Facebook and on YouTube. And also, I recommend heading over to our YouTube channel and subscribing there if you're watching this on Facebook, because we also upload other segments there. So, a lot of times the little individual gardening segments that we'll have in Bob's Live, I'll do as a featured post on YouTube. So if you want to go back and rewatch something like that, we'll have those as a separate feature over on our YouTube channel. And well, this week, if you saw the thumbnail before we got started, we're heading to the zoo. But first, I thought I'd plug our social media. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube, as I said, but we're also on Twitter and on Instagram at Bob's Market. And then we're also, I need to update my little doohickey right here, because we're also on TikTok now, too, at Bob's Market. So you can head to all those locations and find us. And then, of course, you can always head over to our website at bobsmarket.com, where we have blog posts and recipes and a whole bunch more information and some fun activities, one of which I'm going to be talking about at the end of today's episode that we're going to be having next month. So you want to stick around for that. For this week's episode of Bob's Live, I wanted to take us back a couple weeks ago when I went to Cultivate. So it's a huge industry trade show, and I went to a few different events while I was there. And one of the events that I went to was a tour of the Columbus Zoo. And it was kind of a unique tour because it was geared toward people in the horticulture industry. So specifically, our tour guides were the landscapers for the Columbus Zoo. And it was great because we got to kind of pick their brains about how they go about landscaping at a zoo and caring for the grounds there. Because it's gardening, but it has all these other layers added on top of it that they have to consider. So I'm going to talk a lot about that and some of the stuff that just struck me as interesting. And this is where it became hard for me to figure out how to share this, because I wanted to share video with you. But that day at the zoo, of course, the zoo's open for business. And that day in particular, they had around 20,000 guests that day, according to our guide. And that meant that it was loud. You know, there's people talking in the background and stuff. So pretty much all of the audio was unusable. So what I did is I clipped together some video, and I'm going to play it, and you'll see my noggin down in the corner, and I'm just going to kind of narrate it live as it plays. So this is going to be interesting. And because of the program that I'm using to do our live broadcast, I don't have a way to pause the video. So I'm just going to have to kind of do a hit and run and keep up with the video as it's playing. So you know me, I can get a little wordy sometimes. So I will have to try to be quick about it. But some of the things I want to talk about are kind of overarching themes that they talked about that really kind of stood out to me. So I thought I would mention that before we go in, just kind of the list that I made. And some of those are browsable plants. That was a new term that I'd never heard before and is kind of unique to the zoo. So browsable plants are plants that they can feed the animals, or more specifically, the zookeepers. Also, they use local stand-ins for some tropical varieties. So we'll see that when you see video of the African exhibit. They have trees that look like acacia trees that you would see in Africa, but they're not acacia trees because they're not native to this area. So they use locusts instead, which, you know, grow everywhere around here. And then another thing is sight lines. And something that I did that we're going to take a look at after the video is I pulled up Google Maps satellite view of the Columbus Zoo. Because when you're in the zoo and you're looking at an exhibit, a lot of how they hide the surrounding area and the infrastructure and kind of the dividing lines between the exhibits is through landscaping. And there's a couple really cool examples of that. Like, for example, there's a highway that cuts right through the middle of the Columbus Zoo. But you wouldn't know it when you're at the zoo. So sightlines is important. Also, animal safety and security. So if you've got a tree hanging over into an enclosure, you don't want it down enough that the animals can, you know, climb up it and escape. And also guest safety. That was something that I never really considered until they started talking about it on the tour. And then, let's see, another thing that they talked about was their zoo brew, which what they do is they take the waste from the animals and compost it into a fertilizer for the landscaping, which I thought was really cool. So let's go ahead and jump into the video, and I'll try to keep up with it as it goes. So I'm going to look this way because my monitor is over here off to the side, and that way I can see it also. So we started off looking at the flamingos, and something that I thought was funny is that they even have to clear out like the little twigs and stuff in the enclosure because the flamingos can trip over them. Evidently, they're like really clumsy, and they kind of sleep on one leg, and they said sometimes they'll just sort of fall over, which I also thought was kind of funny. This is one of the new exhibits, which obviously there's not a lot a landscaper can do there. I just thought I would share it with you. It was really amazing. And in the tropical fish exhibit in the aquarium, it is really awesome. They do have some live corals that they grow in there, and we'll see it in a second. And they have ultraviolet light over them. So right here, they've got some artificial lighting. And this is the manatee exhibit, and these mangroves are alive. So the mangroves in that exhibit kind of grow up and over, and the manatees kind of trim them off. And there you can see the manatee eating some lettuce. I forget how many pounds of lettuce it was a day that they go through, but they said the big manatee right here, whose name is Fluffy, eats 200 pounds of romaine lettuce a day, which that just blew my mind. That is a lot of salad. And of course, here we have the monkey exhibit, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about these two trees later. They were really interesting. So, of course, it was funny, you know, we're all on this tour, we're taking pictures of the trees and stuff. In the otter exhibit here, this big log, they said they have to replace it every so often, and that's up to the landscapers to do that. So they bring in a crane to lift the old log out and put a new log in. This is a koala exhibit, and that little roof there is to keep the koalas from escaping. They can't crawl out from underneath and around the edge there, and that keeps them from getting up the rest of that tree. And this little guy, he was sleeping, and it's just too cute. It was pretty warm that day, so a lot of the primates were just sort of hanging out and taking it easy. And of course, here we have the apes, and their enclosure is really interesting. So I mainly took this video just to show the enclosure, and what you can see there is kind of a moat. And they use that a lot of times to keep guests separated from the animals. And here you can see another example of that in the tiger exhibit. So you've got this drop off that the tigers, you know, can't get up and over to get to where the guests are. And this is another interesting one. You can see the polar bear walking there, kind of over on the left-hand side of the screen. But in behind there, it looks like a forest. Right on the other side, that's the parking lot. And then this is the Africa exhibit, and the way it's designed is really neat too. So they have different enclosures that are kind of separated by those moats, but the way they have layered them, you don't really see those divisions. And I think I've got another view of that where I kind of pan up. Hopefully it's the next video. Yeah, so here you can kind of see a moat, and then that's the lion enclosure, and then there's another moat in behind there, and then you've got like the giraffes and stuff like that in behind there. So that way you can have predators and prey in the same field of view for the guests, but yet they're separated. And I think they do an excellent job of pulling off that illusion there. And they do have some aviaries at the Columbus Zoo that you can actually walk inside of and walk around. So these ducks, and there was little deer in there and stuff, you could walk right through it. And it was really interesting because, you know, you're right there with the animals. Something else that they talked about was these bird enclosures. So here we've got the bald eagle. They have to really watch like limbs and stuff hanging down on the tops of those. And the bison there, he was just chilling out in front of a fan that day. And this is the lake kind of at the entrance of the Columbus Zoo, and the landscaping around it is just beautiful. I think this is my last clip. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting some of the different considerations that they have to take into account with a zoo. So, let me jump back. I was talking about the catalpa trees around the one primate enclosure. They wanted these to look like an Asian variety of catalpa, which tends to grow shorter than our American varieties. So what they did to achieve that look is they did it through grafting. So they grafted two species of catalpa tree together. And when you're standing there in the viewing area, you can actually see one of the trunks where they spliced the trees together, where they grafted them together, and there's this huge line right across the tree. And that trunk, it's that big around. And, you know, to me, that was just really cool that you just kind of stick one tree on top of another. But by doing that, it gives it the ability, the Asian variety, the ability to withstand our winters. Also around this area, where this catalpa tree was, they have a boat ride where they have dinosaurs on display. So they're big, you know, animatronic dinosaurs. And one of the things that they have to do is trim the limbs that hang down over top of that ride. You don't want, you know, passengers on the ride to be able to reach up and grab the limbs. So what they do is they actually put one of the landscapers in one of the boats on that ride with a pair of shears, and they ride the ride and cut limbs off as they go by. So I thought that was kind of funny. This picture right here, this is kind of a wider shot of the bald eagle enclosure, and you can see the netting overhead there. So they have to keep an eye on all the trees that are growing around that area. and make sure that they get any dead or dying limbs or any limbs that could fall over onto that netting. Um, they have to watch that, because in a strong storm, you could get a limb break off and end up with a hole in the net and have an escapee on your hands. And most of these animals at the Columbus Zoo, manatees are a good example. All of those manatees are being rehabilitated to be re-released into the wild. In fact, the Columbus Zoo is one of only two places outside of Florida that does manatee rehabilitation. And I thought that was really cool. So whenever you go there, all the manatees that are there are being rehabilitated. But a lot of the other animals were either raised in captivity or they were injured in some way so they can't be re-released. So when you have an enclosure like this, you want to make sure that they can't escape, because most likely they wouldn't be able to survive out in the wild on their own. Now I'm getting lost. Here we go. This was the Red Panda exhibit, and something interesting had kind of happened there a few weeks before. One of these guys, which they were kind of just chilling out because it was really hot that day, but they had an escapee, and I'm not sure if it was through plant trimming or what, or just a weak spot in the fence, but yeah, so it does happen at zoos from time to time. Um, this picture, and again, I'm on a landscaping tour. I'm sure the other guests that were there thought we were nuts because we were all taking pictures of like the bushes and the trees and stuff. But we were standing under a walkway, and I noticed that up overhead were crab apples that were growing. And I asked the landscaper that was there with us, hey, can you guys feed these to the animals? Or how does that work? Or do you have to worry about fruit from trees like nuts and crab apples like this? Do you have to worry about them dropping into the enclosures? And he said, yeah, they do. So this they have on their list of browsable plants. So there's some animals at the zoo that can eat crabapple limbs, but they have to pick all the fruit off of them. They can only eat the leaves. And what they do is they maintain a list that basically lists everything that's growing at the zoo, so all the trees, bushes, and everything. And then it says basically these animals can eat these types of plants, these animals can eat these, etc., etc. And then whenever they're trimming bushes and stuff, they'll take those cuttings and give them to the zookeepers. And then the zookeepers can use that to feed to the animals. So that way, instead of mulching or composting or different things like that, they're actually feeding it directly to the animals. Of course, it's specific to each animal that's there and also to the types of plants, which I thought that was really interesting. And it's good for the animals too because it gives them variety in their diet. Something that they talked about, and I forgot to put in another picture of the koala here to talk about it, was koalas, they eat eucalyptus, and they grow eucalyptus on site in a greenhouse, but they also get it shipped in to help feed the koalas because they can't grow enough on site. Well, when the events of last year happened and shipping got shut down, all of a sudden they weren't able to get in enough eucalyptus to feed them. So they had to basically build another greenhouse just to grow eucalyptus to help feed them. So I thought that was really interesting. Um, let's see. That's it. I accidentally looped around there. So I was talking about sightlines earlier. Let me jump over to a satellite view of the zoo. Um, when we saw the polar bear enclosure, in behind, when you're standing there looking at it, it just looks like a forest in behind. And they actually do a good job of hiding the fence because the fence for the enclosure is in behind that. So it looks like there's really nothing keeping the bears in the background. But if we look at the polar bear enclosure, let me jump over here where I can point with my pointer. If you're standing right in here is the viewing area. When you're standing here, this kind of goes up a hill, and then they have pine trees planted along this area. Then it goes down a little incline, and they have the fences back here. So it looks like a 2-layer fence on the satellite view. So there's a fence there and a fence there. Um, but yeah, right in behind it, like right here's the parking lot. And then there's, I'm not sure what that is in behind there. Um, but yeah, they do a good job of hiding that. And then the same way, like when you're crossing over into the Africa exhibit, you're actually crossing a little highway here, a little street that runs through the middle of the zoo. And then you cross over into the Africa exhibit. And again, I was talking about how they have the different layers. So right here's an enclosure, and you can see there's like a ridge line right there. And then there's a fence. And then you've got the larger African exhibit back here where they have the giraffes and everything. So it's kind of cool that they can have the predators right here in this area, and then when you're standing here looking out this way, your sight line, it just makes it look like it's all one continuous piece of land. And then the same way over in this area, when you're looking out through it, all looks continuous. If we zoom back out and kind of go over here, you can see right here is where the highway goes through the middle of the zoo. So, of course, when you're at the zoo, you're walking down this way along the lake, and you go through a tunnel there. And that tunnel, it is down deep enough that really you can't hear any of the traffic. So it is just interesting the way that they divide it up. Let me jump back here. So yeah, that was my trip to the zoo. I'm going to try to do a write-up about this and share some more pictures and stuff over on our blog this Friday. I can go into a little bit more depth about some of the stuff. I've kind of jumped over here. But before we go this week, I wanted to announce that this coming month in August, we're going to be having our virtual fair again. So we did this last year, and unfortunately, last year I had to kind of delay part of it because we had a little bit of an emergency here that I had to tackle. So I had to kind of delay stuff on my end. But this year we are definitely going to keep on schedule with it. Uh, but we're going to be having our virtual fair, and it's solely a photo contest. So the first week is photography, and let me jump over. I need to find last year's post. I was trying to sort stuff out for the zoo part of this video. Oh no. There we go. Okay, here we go. So, week one of our virtual fair is going to be photography. But the entire fair is photo based since it's a virtual fair. So, week one is going to be photography, and I need to do a breakdown of the different categories. And then we're also going to have a junior and adult category. So, let's see. I'm trying to look back through last year's rules. I think 18 and below is junior, and then 19 and above is adult, is the way I divided it up last year. But we'll do a red, white, blue ribbon for each one, or blue, red, white, however first, second, and third breaks down. I need to dig out the ribbons. I still have them. But basically, if you win in a category, first, second, or third place, you'll get a ribbon and a little certificate. And then, of course, all the entries are going to be featured on our website. So the first week is photography. Week two is home canning. So if you have canned goods that you want to show off, like you've canned some beautiful jams or jellies, send us a picture of them. I'm going to have the format for the email a little bit later this week. So week two is home canning. Week three is home arts. So arts, that's painting, printmaking, pottery, sculpture, etc. Crafts like woodworking, model making, etc. Textiles, clothing, weaving, quilting, etc. Those are our three main categories in home arts. And then, of course, the fourth and last week is livestock. And again, it's a photo contest, so I'm going to be judging it like the livestock competition at a fair. Send us a picture with your livestock. And again, it's a photo contest, so that's how we're going to be judging it. So with it, we do kind of have the traditional division. So we've got feeder calves, goats, heifers, hogs, lambs, poultry, and steers. So that's going to be during the month of August. So we've got 4 weeks. And at the end of each week, we'll be doing the winners. And like I said, last year, I had to kind of take a 3-week break because of an emergency here that kind of took all of my attention. But this year, we'll be doing it in the proper order. So yeah, I'll have the information for it out a little bit later this week. And then the photography is going to be due. Probably what I'm going to do is offset it by a week. So the entries for the photography contest will be due by next Friday, and then the winners will be announced the Friday after. So we'll actually go into like the first week of September. And now I'm starting to ramble. So, well, that is it for this week's episode of Bob's Live. And I hope you found our little trip to the zoo kind of interesting. The next time you go to a zoo, think about the landscaping and everything that they have to do there to accommodate both the guests and the animals. It's really interesting. Oh, and the thing that blew my mind is if you've ever been to the Columbus Zoo, it's a really big zoo. And when they said how many landscapers they have on staff there, it blew my mind. Because I was thinking a large number, and it's a really small number. They only have 5 full-time landscapers on staff, and that is it for the Columbus Zoo. Well, until next time, keep growing.